Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Los Angeles City College History 11. These are chapters 4 and 5 study guides for your next exam. So let's get into this. So for chapters 4 and 5, there are about 6 or 7 things that you'll need to know to be able to be successful on the exam. And of course, I will list them really quickly and then go back and explain them. So you'll need to know some basics about English mercantilism. I have a whole chapter on mercantilism, so you need to watch that lecture video, and that'll explain what mercantilism is. You should have some understanding of the Navigation Acts and how the Navigation Acts interweave with mercantilism. You'll want to know a little bit about Nathaniel Bacon and what he wanted. Then when you get into chapters 5, you should know some early characteristics of early American immigration, comprehend the Great Awakening and its effects, and just a little bit about the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel, SPG. So in chapter 4, they're going to wind you through the founding of British North America and its overall effects, and how England then became an empire and what that meant for the reigning monarchy, particularly Charles, his brother James, the Duke of York. And then they'll talk a little bit about the administration, and you'll be able to really pick up here the differences between the administrations of Spain and the administrations of England and why that's going to be a problem later on. So if you didn't really get that in the first 3 chapters, you should go back and look at that, because there arguably will need that as we get towards the end of the semester with the final exam. So you should be able to pick in on that, and this book really talks about that early. By the time we get to page 87 here, we're looking at mercantilism. My lecture covers that, so I won't go into that into heavy detail, but you'll want to know exactly what mercantilism was, and also how mercantilism applied and affected the early British colonies and colonists. Then you're going to go slowly over to talk about just the overall tenets and the problems and issues with early formation of politics. America will develop its own aristocracy. There's an aristocracy in England. Some of those aristocratic members, not a lot of them, but some of them come over. Nathaniel Bacon, who you'll read about in just a moment, will be a minor aristocrat, but aristocrat nevertheless. And the problems with those low-level and minor aristocrats. But you should be able to pick on the idea that we are developing in early British America exclusivity, right? That people are beginning to separate themselves by class, and there's a certain kind of awakening and consciousness that involves politics and involves trade, where certain people are able to benefit from the wealth that's being generated from the colonies and others are not. Now, I don't really get into a whole lot of talking about wars, and I don't expect you to have a complete understanding of the wars, but you ought to take some notes on the wars with the French and why the French lost, and also you should have some understanding of why those wars were being conducted and who ultimately were the winners and losers and how they lost, etc. We're going to move right on towards rebellion, and I have a whole lecture on revolution. So this should help you to understand why revolutions occur. There is a reading in the syllabus for Davies, The Theory of Revolution. So you'll be able to look at just a handful of revolutions: the Protestant Association, Leisler's rebellion, Culpeper's rebellion. There's so many rebellions, and if we're not even talking about slave rebellions yet. So there's lots of rebellions, and you're going to want to just be able to understand Nathaniel Bacon and what he wanted and why things were starting to become problematic. And you'll see that on page 98, where they really talk about Bacon's rebellion. So you should understand who Nathaniel Bacon was, what did he want, and what were the overall outcomes, right? And also, when you're looking at the theory of revolution, you're probably going to have to do some work here. So knowing some of these other rebellions might assist you and help you along the way to kind of hone in on the idea that early in British North America there were already some problems and issues as well. Right? Education starts to play a small role in early British North America. So you don't really have to focus in on that so much, but you should have some kind of an awareness of it, right? That these early colleges like William and Mary, Harvard, right, College of New Jersey, etc. So you should have some early appreciation about that, right? And here, like on page 107, they list the earliest colleges in America. So Yale, College of New Jersey, which is Princeton, right? These others, Columbia, these are the first. College of William and Mary is the second oldest. It remained relatively small, but it's a state college in Virginia. It's actually a really nice school, not difficult to get into, but one of the earliest colleges. So that sums up chapter 4. Now with chapter 5, we're looking squarely, delving into the mid to 18th century. And so again, they're going to talk about population, particularly the growth of the Irish, which when we talk about racial formation, I think I do talk a little bit about the Irish and race. So you've probably had a lot already with reading Balin's text, the separate chapter on population migration, so you should be in good stead. Also, again, you should reinforce and make sure you delve deep into this idea here on blacks and slavery and how slavery has slowly began to being solidified. By the time we get to antebellum slavery, you're going to want to use this information and kind of know it. So you should be picking this up pretty well. The great landowners, of course, those will end up being the great planters and the plantations in the South. So you ought to have some idea of how these plantations begin to rise. And of course, commerce. America is becoming a super wealthy region. And of course, you're going to want to know of religion. And this is carrying over from the Puritans and the Pilgrims and Quakers. One area to key in on, of course, is the Great Awakening. There's going to be a second Great Awakening, so you're going to want to be able to know who the significant players are. Like Jonathan Edwards, right? You'll want to know who that is. And so you'll want to know what the effects of the Great Awakening were. Ministers such as Whitefield. There's a lot of information packed in here, so you'll want to really focus in on the Great Awakenings. They begin an exploration of origins of American politics. I would do a cursory reading over this and have a fairly decent understanding about how things are being situated, particularly in the idea that how Americans begin to rule themselves. And you should be able to see the differences between the way the colonies rule themselves and the way people are governed in England. And that will serve us because by the time we get to the American Revolution, the distinctions between the two will really be highlighted, and you won't have any serious problem in understanding why the Americans were so upset when taxes were levied. But that is essentially it for chapters 4 and 5.